And welcome back to our final and last day of the Dutch Caribbean Research Week 2023. It's going to be a wonderful morning in the Caribbean, and it's a wonderful afternoon here in Amsterdam. As you can see, the setup behind me is different than the previous days, but I will come to that. First, let me ask you, did you go to Gather yesterday? I'm wondering if people interacted because the workshop wasn't over yesterday, and I'm curious if people who are already here in the Zoom went to Gather and enjoyed the last part of the workshop. If you did, I'm really happy that you did and just got some extra knowledge, some extra moments to interact with each other and communicate with each other. As you know, each dame has had its own theme until today, but today has a special theme, namely towards just and sustainable futures. Because it's the last day, I will also say that what we spoke about. On Monday, we spoke about economy and society. On Tuesday, we spoke about health and health care. On Wednesday, about environment and climate. And yesterday, on Thursday, our theme was culture and identity. And again, today, the theme is towards just and sustainable futures. And speaking of yesterday, I want to give a big shout out to everybody who participated yesterday, who made their voices heard. Our keynote speaker, Dr. Angela Roux, who was live in the studio. Our content moderator, Genevieve Phillips Durham, Suzanne Overmeer on behalf of the Learning Orchestra in Aruba, and of course the oral presentations by Saran Stewart, Thomas van Galen, Gregory Richardson, and Angie Jesseren. Also, a sincere thank you to the workshop leader, Dr. Alberta Joseph Alexander. And also an extra thank you to her because she took the workshop together and there people could enjoy the workshop even longer than anticipated. Also, thank you to the poster pictures of yesterday, Liesje Provoyer, Yolanda Richardson, and Carole Terrien. And as I said earlier, today is a little bit different. As you could see, we have a setup behind me. Let's call it a talk show setup. So today we're gonna do the discussion sessions in this setup. The discussion sessions are related to the direction of research and research possibilities in the Caribbean region. The moderator of these discussion sessions is Professor Antonio Carmona Baez. He is the president of the University of St. Martin. So I will leave the stage right now and our moderator will take it from here.
Good afternoon in the Netherlands and good morning in St. Martin and the rest of the Caribbean. Welcome to this panel discussion on the perspectives of the future of Caribbean research. Today in the studio, we have with us Dr. Arnold Lubbers, coordinator of the Caribbean program at NVO, and Dr. Glenn Taudet, program committee of the Program Committee of Caribbean Research, PCCO. Arnold, would you like to introduce yourself and say a few words?
Sure, thank you, Antonio. Yes, my name is Arnold Lubbers. I work as the coordinator of the Caribbean Research Program of the Dutch Research Council since January of this year, which is obviously a very long-running program already. I can say a lot about myself, but I'd like to focus on the program and I'd like to focus on the research that's being stimulated by it. First of all, I'd like to start by acknowledging the fact that the conversation that we're having today is a result of the fact that the Dutch participated in colonialism. There's an effect that is still going on today, and that sets the context for everything that we're doing. Within the program, we have acknowledged that as well, and that means that we are taking steps in order to ensure that the program is going to take that into account a bit more in the way in which procedures are formed, in which funding can be developed, and also in the way in which we are going to enter conversations. I hope that we can show you more of the results or what that concretely means in the coming years. But for now, I want to focus on the CARP network organization. CARP, some of you may not have known that its name has been shortened only a short while ago. It used to be the Dutch Caribbean Research Platform, but in a sounding board, we've concluded that the abbreviation should be CARP, Caribbean Research Platform, which probably more adequately conveys the intention underneath the networking organization, which is collaboration. And collaboration doesn't end at borders that were imposed by the Netherlands upon the region. The networking organization is in a very advanced stage of development. The task force of the Caribbean Research Platform has been traveling throughout the region and has been speaking to, well, plenty of organizations, plenty of individuals, both inside and outside of academia, that say anybody involved or impacted by knowledge production has been taken into account as much as possible within the time span and with the resources available. The task force has developed a set of work packages that they are going to unveil in the coming months as well. But perhaps most importantly is that the organization is going to be implemented physically on all 6 of the Caribbean islands, the SSS ABC islands. There's going to be a governance structure in place ensuring that the organization will be informed and owned by the communities from the region. And that also means that the future directions of the organization, its goals, and so on, can be evaluated, moderated, perhaps even set in a different direction based on the experiences of the communities from the region. So we hope that by providing a support system for research in the broadest sense, we can stimulate research in the broadest sense as well. And I hope that that's going to be a first step towards a more equitable and just collaboration with the communities of the islands. And I think I should leave it at that for now and talk with everybody involved further. So
great, thank you very much, Arnold. Glenn, with the Program Committee Caribbean Research, what is in store for Caribbean research?
Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity also. And I would like to touch upon a theme that we've discussed in the Program Committee for Caribbean Research. Part of the responsibilities that this Program Committee has is to guide the process that was just discussed by Arnold on the Caribbean Research platform. But a part of it is also, and it's based on a report by Baker and Weite, that there is felt a need to come to a comprehensive research agenda also for the region, and through which the funding could be acquired, maybe, or in any case, you could say the research projects aimed at the future of the Caribbean region of the kingdom could be inspired by. And I want to just say something about the process and the future of this research agenda. The process was that it should be a research agenda for, of course, the people of the Caribbean region of the kingdom, but also by the people of the Caribbean region of the kingdom. So it was thought to set out a survey, and that is more or less also in the same way that it was done for the Dutch National Research Agenda. So there was a research that was set out, and in 2019, about 400 people responded from the islands, but also of the diaspora of the islands. And all of the information that was harvested through the survey of 2019 was then compiled by a group of people. Also, I was involved in that also, And so we compiled that and made a narrative of the research needs of the communities in the Caribbean part of the kingdom. Just as we were finishing this, and of course, it was at the beginning of 2020, we were hit with the pandemic of COVID, and that meant that we had to halt the development of the research agenda because we wanted to actually reach out to the communities and have talks with the communities to validate the results that we harvested, to make sure that we did not maybe color the narrative in a way that people would not recognize as such. So we wanted to do that, but we halted for a moment. And then at the end of 2020, the need was felt to actually, since we were all of a sudden faced with a probably significantly different reality within the Caribbean part of the kingdom due to the COVID pandemic, we noticed maybe the effects of isolation or maybe other effects that were all of a sudden very evident. And we thought it was smart and wise to do a second survey at the end of 2020 to see if there were any changes in the needs and the wishes of the community to add to the narrative of the research agenda. And we did indeed find that there was a little bit more focus on sustainability, a better data landscape through which validated objectively through a scientific research method to inform the decisions to be made in the Caribbean part of the kingdom. And then we also noticed that all of a sudden there was the theme of the healthcare system, but also the care systems within the islands was actually more brought to the front if we compare it to the survey of 2019. So we started to include that and add it of the second harvest to the narrative that we've been formulating. And we now are planning to start the process, plan the process, and then eventually execute the process of going into conversation with experts and in the community to see if the harvesting has been translated well enough, recognizable enough, and as the community has intended. And then we'll hopefully set this research agenda formally through the Program Committee of Caribbean Research. And then we do hope that we then can share it with everybody and that it will lead to inspiration for upcoming researchers, maybe through CARP, but also individual researchers that might find themselves inspired to then come up with projects to eventually feed that need of our communities. I think that also, just as Arnold said, I'll leave it for this, and we hope to have a talk and a discussion about this further.
Great, great. And just one question before we go delve in there. Glenn, you served as rector of the University of Aruba. All these changes are going to have an impact, hopefully a positive impact, on research in the Caribbean. How do you see institutions being positively impacted by this?
Yes, thanks for the question. It's an important question. When I was rector of the university, which I served in that function for almost 10 years. And before that, I was actually 6 years of the dean of the law school of the University of Aruba. So I've had quite some experience dealing with the academia in the Caribbean part of the kingdom. And one of the things that I felt the need for at that time was the need for a more comprehensive approach to research, a more programmatic approach to research, and a more collaborative approach to research. We've done some efforts to try to form alliances with other institutions in the region. We also tried to come up with programs from within faculties, but also multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary, trying to get faculties to come together and to formulate comprehensive programs. But it was always met with the limitations that we have in these institutions on the islands, that there are not enough resources like time, personnel, resources like money, to be able to sit together, set the time. It's a long-term process. We know now that I've been involved through the PCCO. It's a long-term process that needs, sustained attention and sustained effort. And I do think that this process, as we have gone into now, if we are in continuous dialogue with the institutions, it will lead to a platform, but also a landscape that eventually will completely support the institutions in the Caribbean.
Okay, yes, thank you. And Arnold, what do you think about the impact of these changes and the new possibilities within the NVO structure?
Thank you. Yeah, that's an amazing question, because it also touches on some of the changes that we've been experiencing ourselves in the past couple of years. So perhaps it's good to explain that the funding for the Caribbean research program that we had in the past from the Dutch Ministry of Education, Science and Culture has been, it was always of a temporary character. Since the start of this year, the funding for the program has become structural, which means there's, as far as we know now, no end to it. The budget for the program has also been expanded. There's been €500,000 each year has been added to the program, which used to fund the Caribbean Netherlands Science Institute, which was disbanded on January 1st. So that means that there's going to be much more options to form and formulate and build in a sustainable long-term manner, which means that the way in which we have to think about the opportunities that we can create with the program are in line with that. So the question is not so much perhaps what do you think the program can do, but what do the institutions need in a long-term sustainable perspective, and then we can try to work with in order to make that happen within the limitations of the budgets and the legal constellations that we're working it within the kingdom. But let's please dive into those options.
Great. And you mentioned, earlier the colonial history of the Netherlands. And would you see these actions as reparatory actions within the Caribbean region?
There's a sensitive topic there, Antonio. All right. So if we're talking in terms of reparations, then the question that pops up in my head first is who is going to set the needs, the demands on what the reparations are based on, right? I think when it comes to reparations, you also touch on a legal dimension. Mm-hmm. And that's a dimension that is far removed from the primary goals and the organization that NVO currently is. Mm-hmm. So
would you call these corrective measures?
That may be a better word, or perhaps an intervening type of measures that we can develop if that's indeed what the communities in the Caribbean want. Mm-hmm. The thing is, the program has a budget that can create opportunities. We are uniquely positioned to work with or for the Caribbean communities in order to develop exactly what is asked. That is an opportunity, I think, within the context of ongoing colonialism is something we should acknowledge and take very seriously. So not to develop any top-down measures, top-down interventions.
Community-based.
Exactly.
Right. Great. We also have joining us online a few scholars and researchers joining us from the Caribbean, and I would like to just call upon them. From the University of Curacao, we have Dr. Margot Groeneveld, who is a senior researcher and just came back from a long trip in the United States, where she carried out research related to the Caribbean. Is Margot online?
I am. Am I supposed to also start my video?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, here I am.
Please.
Yes. Good
There
morning.
you go.
It's good to see
Good
you
morning.
there. Yes.
Good morning, Margot.
Curacao. Yes. Antonio.
Margot, you've heard what the colleagues had to say about the perspectives of the future of the research in the Caribbean, some of the changes that we're seeing in the structure. Can you share perhaps some of your perspectives? Perhaps start off by introducing yourself.
Yes. Thank you, Antonio. And hello, Arnold and Glenn. It's wonderful to see you all there in this very nice, tropical, colorful environment. Yes, well, you introduced me. I'm a researcher. I'm a historian, but I've done a lot of work also very, related to social sciences, public health. But most of all, I'm a Dutch Caribbean historian. And when I was in the US, there was this sentence popping up again and again where I would say, the Dutch Caribbean really aren't that Dutch. So I'm so super happy to hear that DUCARP is no longer DUCARP, and that transnational approach is not only it's not only justified from whatever perspective you look at it, and I'm now responding more than introducing myself. But it's not. But if you look at languages and migrations and yeah. So that's part of my research. I'm researching mobility in the transnational Caribbean perspective. And I've been guest lecturing about that too in the US, and now back in Curacao since a few weeks. Do you want me to continue and respond?
Sure, sure. And, perhaps you could share some of your experience as guest lecturer in the United States. You see similar discussions going on in the United States with the Caribbean diaspora?
Yes, well, yes and no. That if I just make just summarize it a bit roughly, perhaps the whole development towards this transnational approach is much advanced, so that's a positive thing. And at the same time, it's like the Dutch Caribbean is, it's not there. It's and so there is a lot we can do together with a lot of colleagues out there to join forces and be part of, of the discussions there. So it was very, I had very mixed experiences. On one hand, to feel really humbled by what students would come up with, so deep and profound and so well versed when it comes, to the theories behind things and the philosophies, the position of Haiti, working with the philosophers. And not just the Glissant and Fanon, but really deep thinking about what's going on in the Caribbean and the historical roots of that from a people's perspectives. Yet at the same time, some people would comment on my field as German. So there's really this blind spot that's enormous, and I cannot wait to continue this, and I and to work not so much in a Dutch kingdom, Dutch Caribbean kingdom perspective, but a much broader perspective, and really join forces with these faculty people, these research institutes. I was at the Dominican Studies Institute in New York, but there are so many out there, and join forces. And then, of course, it will be interesting how we position ourselves with dropping the Dutch. So we have a lot of work to do also in in that regard of making connections. And I know, for instance, Antonio, you are in that field, and there are more people. So that brings me to a second element that I want to respond on, and that's you use the word institutions a lot in the vision of and you is Arnold, of how to proceed. But if you look at people who can participate in research, and research is, for me, it's a term that really doesn't say anything, because there's so much involved in research. It's not just one thing. So in the whole academic discussion, there are so many people involved and institutions, and I guess you refer to the universities, are only part of that, but it's not the whole field. So I would like you to elaborate on that, or maybe other people can respond on that. But that's something I really think we need to discuss. Who do we have, who can and who want to contribute? What's the position, in particular, of fields like the humanities, when you see a lot of questions are relative to very urgent social issues, and then the humanities very often, in my perspective, are sort of watered down to the ones who contextualize from, for instance, a historical perspective, and then we move on. And I'm sorry, Antonio, I know, for instance, Ines at the helm is doing a great job there. So I know I'm not being too academic, but I'm just, I'm just pushing you to respond, really. But
sure.
Humanities is a very important question, and also the participatory action research, especially. I did a lot of work in public health, and we still do a lot of things for other people. We use surveys, but we all know the islands. Who fills out a survey? So of course, what Glenn was telling about the narrative and reaching out, it's absolutely necessary. But in the research, the participatory thing, the co-creation, how can we guarantee that it's not just a buzzword and a lip service, and really do that?
Yes, great. So thank you, Margot. Would either of you like to comment on this?
Sure. Thank you, Margot. And I think I'm going to keep my answer brief for now, because there's plenty of other people in the Zoom link as well. But I entirely agree, and I'm not just speaking for myself. I know that there are the people who are in the program committee agree with you. The research landscape doesn't end at the walls of the institutions at all. Perhaps you could even say that the research landscape is much bigger outside of the walls of the formal academia as opposed to inside. So this is something that we acknowledge in the program as well. So the future design of the program needs to cater to that. And how we're going to ensure that that takes place is something that we would discuss with the entire community as well. So agreed.
Yes. Glenn, you agree as well?
Yes, I certainly agree. We did discuss this point also extensively within the program committee. I also think that Margot touched the point on the inclusiveness of all disciplines also, right? Because the walls of the institutions at this moment, they only carry a specific type of a limited amount of the disciplines that have also been identified already through the harvest, that are needed to have people to research them. And it's not only the hard scientific research that we're looking at, but also the research in action. Right. I'd say so. That means that we will approach this in a novel way, as inclusive as possible, based on well, the points that Margot brought forward and Arnold, we need a new and decolonial, so meaning non-Western maybe, approach to academia and to research and to knowledge, and to help to, not only restore but build the knowledge landscape that we really find that we need as islanders within that region.
Right. Well, now that we're talking about going outside the walls of academia, from the lovely island of St. Eustatius, Statia, as we say in the Caribbean, we're going to speak to policy advisor, Dr. Kimani Kitson Walters. Are you on, Kimani?
Yes, I'm here.
Right.
Thanks for having me.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. It's nice and sunny outside, and just enjoying the lovely weather today.
Good, good. Kimani, we're talking about doing research outside of the walls of academia, or designing research outside of the walls of academia and involving the community. What would you have to say about this?
Well, coming from my background, I was previously employed by the Caribbean Netherlands Science Institute. My background is mainly fisheries research, coastal ecosystems management, and applying that science for sustainable uses on the island. And for us, that topic is very interesting, because for Saba and Statia in particular, where we don't have an institute per se, or before we had the CNSI, we don't have an institute now. We're sort of worried as to how we will be able to participate in this new program, because most of the islanders most of the people I've spoken to on Saba and Statia are quite worried about what will happen to us because of the loss of CNSI. So that's one of the things I kind of wanted to bring out. Yeah.
Okay. Do you see that the restructuring that is happening? Do you see any possibilities, opportunities for the people of Statia to be more involved in designing and being informed of the research that is being carried out, or that will be carried out?
Yes, certainly. Well, with the new direction of CARP, because I have to keep remembering it's now CARP and not DCARP. There are plans to have someone on the island for CARP, if I'm not mistaken, and that plan to someone who is local, who will be integrated into the society. And I mean, there's also continuous research happening now. Through mostly natural sciences based, but we really want to get into the humanities and the public health side of things. So there's a lot that can be explored with collaborating with all the islands, which CARP will focus on, and not only just the Dutch Caribbean islands, as you mentioned, but all the other islands around the region, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, St. Kitts and Nevis, that have very strong programs in all these various topics that can assist the lack that we have, that we would like to build here.
Thank you, Kimani. And Kimani just mentioned public health, and so I would like to call on Mireia Ruiz, who spoken earlier this week. Mireia Ruiz is from Zone MV. How are you doing today, Mireia?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm good. I'm doing good. Thank you for having me on this panel discussion.
What's in store for research in the areas of the medical sciences, biomedical sciences, health research? What are the implications of opening up to the community for Zone MV?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think when I explained in my presentation earlier this week, currently Zone MV does not have a specific program for Caribbean research, but we are thoroughly looking at the possibilities for maybe implementing a program or opening up our regulations. We are like you said, it's a long-term process. It's not going to be done tomorrow, even though we want to. It's a process we really have to do our own research in and figure out what's the best option for a longer sustainable research platform for instance, health and health innovation. But I think what this week has shown us is that there's a lot of health-related topics and health-related questions that are currently playing in the Caribbean that really needs funding or needs further research. What I find interesting is that, for instance, some projects were really like a lot of regulations or guidelines are just being copied from the Netherlands, and like you guys said, and also Margot, it's a very different local setting. There's different context, different organizations, also different health topics. So it doesn't make sense to copy that from the Netherlands. And I think the coming years, there should be really looking at what are the more local topics and how can we implement those local topics into health research and implementation of those research. And I think it's interesting because NWO is also talking about outside of academia. I think Zonneweg has some experience with that because we do not only fund universities or academic hospitals, but we are also working with health organizations or institutions. And I see those same things coming also from the more in practice. If you're just doing research and you're not bringing it into practice or co-creating with those people who are really working in the workplace, I think that's the most important to really work together. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much, Mireia. And from my current home, St. Martin, I'm going to call on Carla Vaughn, who's an independent researcher who has been involved in disseminating a lot of information on history of St. Martin, the culture of St. Martin, and also involved in many other projects. Good morning, Carla.
Good morning, Antonio.
How are you doing today?
Me. I'm
yes.
Good. Well, as Antonio already mentioned, my name is Carla Vaughn. I'm based on the island of St. Martin. My background is in international affairs with a focus on civic and transnational issues. So I actually started out coming back home to work for the Social Economic Council, which also led me, of course, to be involved in research outside of an academic setting. But indeed, as Antonio mentioned, I became involved in kind of helping to create a historical space that's led by young people who are returning to the island, because we are also recognizing the gaps that we've had in terms of academic information and spaces within our upbringings on the island, and in our return, try to see exactly as Margot mentioned, if we know that on the island, people don't fill out surveys, what are the ways in which we are communicating and sharing information? How do people want to absorb this information? And I think that indeed, we as a historical space, it was me along with 4 other youngsters, we came back and we started a podcast that we tend to take the ways that we learned from studying abroad and bring them back here. And then as we go on, try to adapt. And we learned a lot about how our community wants to absorb information, how they want to interact with us, and what are useful ways. And we're now seeing how do we move forward in terms of pushing, advancing the sharing of historical information with the broader population based on these past experiences. And for that reason, I think that indeed the conversations that have been ongoing with CARP, which I've also been a part of through the University of St. Martin, have been very interesting in terms of this basis of ownership, because it's not just about the universities feeling ownership over this institution or researchers feeling ownership over this institution, but how is the general population interacting with this institution that is established, and how are they seeing the everyday ways in which they are consuming information and sharing information being absorbed into academia, reflected in academia, and also fed back to them.
All right. Thank you very much. And now, finally, we're going to speak with Daudi Saintje, who is an archaeologist. Daudi, are you with us? I think you might need to unmute. Oh, no, you're not muted. Perhaps your mic is on the wrong setting, Daudi, because you have a headset.
Or no?
Would it be possible for you to take off the headset or unplug it?
Can you hear me right now?
Yeah. Yes, we hear you now.
Okay.
Good morning, Daudi.
Yeah, and the mic wasn't working, so but now it is.
Daudi, tell us about yourself and the work that you're doing.
Yeah, now my name is Audilla. I'm an archaeologist and I specialize in Caribbean archaeology, actually, and especially from the ABC SSS Islands. And I'm doing as well like a lot of community work. I'm also a community organizer with Audilla Martis, and we do Caribbean Ancestry Club. So we like organize different events throughout the Netherlands, but also in the Caribbean, for the community as well. And now I'm doing a project about contact sites. So contact archaeological sites. So there are like indigenous sites on Curacao, which have been colonized by the Spanish and later on the Dutch. And I'm researching the archaeological finds on those sites.
Great, great. And through your work with the community, Daudi, what do you see works and what doesn't work, or what would need more support?
No, I think what needs more support is like also like more visibility and opportunities from the institutions for the Caribbean people, because I do see we discuss for example like how to get funding for Caribbean people as well on our events, and there are a lot of people who don't know how to apply, for example, for funding, and I think that's really important so that the people that really wants to pursue a career in academia as well know how to get funding, for example. So right. What I also see is that I think that there needs to be more interaction between the institutions and the community as well, so that people who normally don't apply for funding can get funding as well, because they do have like visions and do want to research, but they don't know how. And I think that's a very that's a point that needs to be improved.
So for you, Daudi, the news about CARP, the Caribbean Research Platform, this is warmly welcomed.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and but I also think that it also needs to be more visible, like for people and how to get involved. And I would love also to like collaborate, for example, with CARP, and also invite them to our events, for example. And so that people also can see what CARP really does and can mean for them. So, but I do think it's a very great opportunity for Caribbean people and Caribbean communities.
Great, great. Well, Glenn, yes. We've heard from our researchers in the Caribbean and also from our colleagues here in some of the research or funding institutions and agencies such as Meneges from Zone MV. Do you hear an echo in everything that you and Arnold have spoken upon?
Yes, I do recognize a lot of this, and I'm happy about that because it shows that there's a consistency in the needs. There's a consistency also in the way of looking at the future. People want to collaborate with one another. People want to explore new ways of doing research and include more people to do research in novel ways. And so that to me is gives me a lot of hope. I do also see that the work that we've been doing, in the preparation of CARP and the research agenda, that aligns to these needs. So I'm extremely happy to that, and I hope that we continue to do this. So we continue to, you have to continuously make sure that your alignment doesn't get skewed through time. So we need to continue to stay in touch to make sure that the echo we hear is indeed coinciding with what we are doing. So I'm happy with this, yes, certainly.
Great, great. Arnold, are you hopeful?
Yeah, exactly because of what Glenn just said, the consistency is also something that I'm hearing. I in particular would like to respond shortly to what Kimani and Audilla spoke about, because without promising things that CARP can deliver, because I mean it has to prove itself as an organization, but I think one of the most important things that I can still add about CARP is that the organization is really going to be in, for, and by the region. Meaning that, like Kimani said, yes, there's going to be an employee on Statia, but there's going to be more than that as well. There's going to be people on Statia who are part of the governing board of the organization. There's people from Statia participating in an island council that's going to advise the direction and developments of CARP. There's going to be stations participating in the advisory boards of all the different work packages as well, steering it into the direction and making sure that, in this case, the station needs and the regional leads are all connected and all inform the direction and the developments of the organization. And talking about the visibility that Audilla touched on, it's one of the explicit goals of CARP to not only become visible, but also to work with the needs as expressed and develop courses, make them available, also working on the creation of a graduate research school, which was something that was already in development by the cooperating universities, but it's going to be, we're going to be in service of that as well. So there's a range of things that CARP should support, which I hope everything that's been expressed will be dealt with.
Great, great. Well, you spoke a lot about stakeholders in the communities. Mireia, if I could go back to you, who are the stakeholders when it comes to biomedical health research and science in the Caribbean?
I think those stakeholders are usually like, of course, you have the universities and the hospitals, but I think very unique to the islands is that there's a lot of how do you call them, foundations, health foundations, institutions that work separately, and they have a goal that they want to bring, for instance, more healthcare or certain things. They're all a little bit how do you call it, separated within islands, compared to, for instance, the Netherlands, that has a very like good or I'd say good, but solid structure for strong infrastructure for knowledge or research. I think getting to know those separate institutions and see how they work together, I think that's a very important stakeholder analysis that we have to still perform thoroughly. But also the patients, the clients who are going to use those health research or the results of that health research. I think involving them is very, very important for, like you said, co-creation, because that's what we're doing it for in the end. All that health research is eventually for the people.
Right, and we understand that this reaching out to the community, taking stakeholders into account when we're thinking about research, this is not just a question for the Caribbean. This is a question for the entire, for the Netherlands and for the entire, the world of research and science, correct?
Yeah, correct. I can even see it in our current projects. I'm working for the mental health programs. A lot of the time, researchers are saying, but I involve enough patients. And then when we inform them on which different ways you really have to involve them, then they're kind of like surprised, like, oh, I didn't know I could do that. I really have to involve them from the beginning, from already the brainstorms or also the implementation phase. It's just not the one-time talking or interview. It's much broader than that. And we also see that if you do that, that the project or the research has much more impact in a whole. So yeah, it's definitely also where the Netherlands is still a learning process. But yeah.
Great, great. I also like to put the spotlight, heel eventjes, on St. Martin. Going back to Carla, we talked about stakeholders. And Carla, I remember in this talk show, Mele, that you had together with the other young researchers and community workers in St. Martin, that you had representation from the French collectivité de St. Martin involved. So stakeholders in St. Martin would go beyond a border. Would you see it like that?
Yes, and I see that. I think that I can echo. I think Margot already mentioned it, that it's nice to see the Dutch drop from DCRW, in a sense that we indeed have multiple lived realities on each of the islands that we're on, right? And for St. Martin, we have this very particular experience of one, of course, being part of the Dutch Caribbean, but also having an open border with the French side of the island. But then also having a social makeup that is, of course, I can't speak for the French side, but for the Dutch side, I mean, St. Martiners form a minority of the population that we're on. So we see a lot of different lived realities and different institutions that we might interact with on a different basis that is not defined by a space like the Dutch Caribbean or the Kingdom of the Netherlands. So when we created the history podcast, we thought that it was very important that we thought about, and I think that that's a question that DCRW asked itself as well, or CARP, sorry now, is that the institutions that we're creating and the spaces that we're creating, how do they reflect the different spaces that we live in? And on St. Martin, we saw that we don't have that many institutions that reflect this open borderness of the island. And it's up to us then to respond of how do you create something that indeed, and I think that was always a question from the beginning with CARP, that how does this institution reflect the different borders that we're finding ourselves affiliated with? And I think that indeed connecting to a broader Caribbean identity is also asking ourselves, indeed, how do you solidify something? Because an institution is very structural, but indeed that it still has the space to respond to the fluidity of the spatial, of the fluidity of the space that is the Caribbean.
Right, right. Okay. Margot, in Curacao, very quickly, can you tell us about other stakeholders outside of the halls of academia in Curacao?
Oh, yes. Well, I was very happy to have a lunch meeting this week at a co-working space with Renske Pin, who is actually the chair of the program committee for this week. And there's a whole community there of independent scholars working together, or at least communicating together in the field of mental health, like Mireia already mentioned, there are many organizations working in the field. This brings me back again to what is research. You know, there's so many people involved. And it's not just the ones with a PhD or doing surveys that are researchers. Yeah, there are many people, and also I see an increasing amount of people just moving around or being in other places and being actively involved somehow in doing research relative to the Dutch Caribbean. So I of course, I understand your question, but I think if we really, and that was discussed last Tuesday here at this meeting, that we really need to start seeing who is involved and also discuss methodology, discuss talents, discuss, you know, some people are team players and others are more individuals, and how can we all bring this together? So I don't know if this answers your question. So it's independent scholars, it's the smaller entities doing work that you absolutely need in that outreach that is so vital for whatever you do on the island. Right. And so, yeah, and I also like to mention the area of Papiamento for the smaller islands, where a lot of work is being done and which is very important. I had a meeting this week with people involved in that, and there's so much going on now also towards digital humanities. So if you discuss humanities, you need to discuss digital humanities as well.
Of course. Thank you very much, Margot. And with this, we will conclude this panel. Thank you to all who joined us online. Thank you, Dr. Lubbers. Thank you, Dr. Tode. And I would like to give the floor back to Audilla. Good afternoon, and welcome back to this day's topic on the future of research and sustainable futures. And once again, with me, I have Dr. Arnold Lubbers, and we are also joined online by Dr. Saren Stewart, Danik Traulon, Shakara Blake, Shirley Emanuelson, and of course the DCRW audience who will join us through Mentimeter. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask our guests to introduce themselves, give a little bit about their background, and then we'll jump into the questions. Arnold. Yes. Good afternoon again.
Good morning, good afternoon again. Thank you. Yeah, I'm Arnold Lubbers. I work as the coordinator of the Caribbean Research Program at NWO, amongst a lot of other things.
All right. And Saran Stewart?
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. My name is Dr. Saran Stewart. I'm an associate professor here currently at the University of Connecticut. Prior to that, I was a senior lecturer and deputy dean at the University of the West Indies on the Mona campus in Jamaica. And I'm director for global education, director for academic affairs here as well in Connecticut.
Great to have you with us, Saran. And Danik Traulon?
Hi there, thank you for having me. My name is Danik Traulon. I'm a PhD candidate for the NWO-funded project C-Link, where I think about the societal impact of our research. And in that capacity, I'm also a member of the program committee for this week, so it's lovely to be part of this panel. And maybe to also mention that I work sometimes as a community organizer for the Six Island Zine platform, along with Alexine Gabriela and Nigmara Kok. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Danik. And also as PhD researcher in Amsterdam, Shakara Blake.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Shakara Blake. I was educated at the University of Amsterdam. That's where I gained my MD, and I started my PhD 2 years ago here in Curacao. on the subject of colorectal cancer, also through the University of Amsterdam.
Great, thank you, Shakara. And finally, Shirley Emanuelson. Shirley?
Hi all, thank you for this opportunity. Yes, my name is Shirley Emanuelson and I'm an artist, filmmaker, artistic researcher, and currently part of the Islanders at the Helm research program, and affiliated with the University of Amsterdam and KITLV.
All right. Welcome, Shirley. And I would like to invite the audience to participate through the Mentimeter app and just introduce yourselves in the chat, and we'll see where you're coming from. We'll go right into the questions. Topic one for this session is the allocation of research funds for the islands, for the 6 islands, that is Aruba, Curacao, St. Martin, Bonaire, Saba, and Statia. And my question for you, Arnold, as well as for the others, is what comes to mind when thinking about bottlenecks or challenges in the allocation of funding research on the islands?
That's a great question, Antonio. Thank you. I'd say one of the major bottlenecks is the current practice of the Dutch Research Council. And I don't mean to make it into a joke, but the way in which the Dutch Research Council currently works is very much focused on the Dutch reality, the Dutch very segmented organized system. So it doesn't take into account other lived realities, cross-border collaborations, the validity of borders, and so on. So I would say in particular to the Caribbean region, and I'm explicitly not saying the Dutch Caribbean region, I mean the Caribbean region, I'd say our current practice is a major bottleneck for funding.
Okay. Saran?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm so glad that Arnold is on this. Hey, Arnold. I get to work with great colleagues.
Oh, we're lost you for a moment. And we'll be back to you, Saran. 1 second. There you are. Are you back with us? If you could unmute your mic. Oh no, your mic is unmuted. Okay. If we could just move on to Danique, and we'll come back to Saran.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. What I can reflect and add to what Arnold has said is that, and I understand why it's the case, it's the legacy of the way funding has always been done. But what I experience in my personal work as a bottleneck is that is when we do research within institutions, and that's not the only way that research is done, that when these are Dutch institutions, it's quite difficult actually to be based on the islands and to form long-lasting and sustainable and meaningful relationships with the communities that we aim to serve with our research. And I find this a very big bottleneck because it kind of mediates the way that I, as a researcher, if I can speak for myself here, can engage with the people that I would like to serve. And so I would like to hear from others, maybe in the panel, for maybe creative solutions that they have come up with or that they're working on for those of us who are currently based in the Netherlands, how we can have more meaningful relationships and perhaps have them be physically based on the islands for longer periods of time.
Thank you, Danique. Shall we go back to Saran?
Sure. Can you hear me well?
Yes,
okay.
We hear you.
Great.
Yeah.
I'm fortunate to have evaluated and been an assessor for the NBO. And I completely agree with Arnold in that the very metrics that we're often asked to use does not allow for that type of equitable research funding across the region. one of the things that I sit on multiple regional boards in the Caribbean, CARICOM being one, as well as the public health agency, CARFO. And I would argue that some of the regional funding needs to come within the region from cross-sectoral funding that is available to the 6 islands, but is always somewhat looked at from a Dutch context in terms of just going through the Netherlands. That's highly problematic because the region knows the region best. There are critical researchers within the region that are not being tapped into. There are resources, capacity building that literally across islands just are not being spoken to. We just had a conference with a public health agency, and we had a couple of Dutch colleagues there, to be quite honest with you, but from Suriname in particular. And we had colleagues across the Francophone countries, Martinique, etc. And to collaborate across and within the region, I think is highly critical, rather than only looking towards the Netherlands or the NVO, because the current indicators are not equitable for the region. It's not designed for and by the region, which is in itself problematic, to be honest.
Thank you, Dr. Stewart. And Shakara Blake.
Yes, I think the most important aspects have been highlighted in regards to the bottlenecks. And I have to say, in my own research, I've been extremely fortunate. I work at a prevention center, very small scale on the island. And our own professor, Professor Bob Pinedo, has always been quite creative in gaining funding. And he's not always looked towards the old colony, if I may say so, but he's always looked to many alternatives. So that's what I'd offer, you know, like Dr. Stewart just highlighted. It's also up to us to understand that there are alternatives. There are many different ways, many different pots, many different ways to roam, and to remember that, because there are many well-willing parties out here. We don't always see them, and they're not always easily accessible. I do agree with that, but they do exist. It's probably a very positive view on it, but in my own experience, lots of people and organizations are extremely well-willing, and they exist, and it's up to the researcher to ask the question, because oftentimes they want to help us, but don't even know how. So we also have to indicate what we need. And it's about open communication and looking towards each other as well. But that's a topic that I think is going to come up in the second part.
All right,
so I won't get ahead of myself.
All right, Shakara, thank you. Shirelli, you have navigated the world of funding inside and outside of academia. What are the bottlenecks that you would identify?
Well, I think many valid points were mentioned. I think I would like to start then going in the past and not starting from now, because I think a good step has been made so far, in the sense that things are becoming more visible. There is an attempt of reaching each other. But if we look in history, I mean, there is a kind of imbalance of particular disciplines that conduct research on the islands versus other disciplines, particular methods that always have gotten a chance to do research, also a particular favoritism of who does and in terms of topics. So that means those are all sensitive issues, I understand, but that implies how people perceive what research is, how people understand it, and who gets to do particular research. So I think historically, I mean, how research has been conducted on the islands, who does it, and the topics that are being chosen really determines how, who gets to do it in the future or in present even. And I think if we don't even talk about these past recurring issues, then we won't get to the crux of certain things. So I would drop that one at first, but of course, it's a conversation. So
All right, thank you, thank you. And so we have someone else with us here online. You please introduce yourself. Who's that? No? Okay, sorry. All right, Arnold, you've...
I don't know, but perhaps we can also use the Mentimeter and for this topic.
Sure, sure. There's...
Yeah, it's on screen right now, I believe.
So we're waiting for...
So everybody who's now in the chat, I think, can go to menti.com and use the code that's in the upper part of the screen.
On the chat.
14 17 37 2. You can use that, and you can. It's also in the chat if you want to click on that. We've been just discussing the first topic a bit amongst each other in the panel, but everybody obviously is free to add to that what comes to mind when thinking of bottlenecks in the allocation of funding, research on the islands, which I guess allows me for a short response. If
Sure.
that's okay with you,
sure.
Antonio?
From what you're hearing, yes.
Because I think there's a bit of a red line, as you can say, in all of those responses. Like there's a huge discrepancy between who is providing the funding and who actually is receiving the funding, or who expresses the need for funding, or what should the funding go to. Let's just say it like that. In general, and I'm taking Shirelli's word history here very literally, as a council, we have a very strong tradition of thinking that we know quite well on how to organize how funding should be streamlined, on what the criteria should be for assessment. Basically anything, in the decision-making progress, we design that progress, right? So I think it's very clear that that's not an option any longer. So I'm agreeing with you already, let's leave it in the past. And let's work towards a much more participatory way in designing funding opportunities for the region, in which the council is more of a facilitator and the community is in the driver's seat.
All right. Okay. And I have another question for you. Often we hear that things are not possible because of legal constraints, because institutions are placed in certain countries. They have the capacity to work across borders or in borders. Do you see changes happening in that area?
Okay, so there's two answers to that. Thank you. Yes, in a sense, if you want to stick with the tradition, those legal boundaries are there. And if you want to keep those legal boundaries intact, then they will effectively make sure that there's going to be loads of obstacles for anybody from the Caribbean region applying for funding at, in this case, the Dutch Research Council. But those limitations or those rules or those legal boundaries are all in place based on a policy decision, which makes it so that the policy decision may also make exemptions or cross them out altogether. There may be legal risks involved, but that should not withhold us from working in that direction. So I'm not afraid, so to say, to move the program into that direction with the community and with everybody involved.
All right. Okay. Thank you. And so we have a couple of answers from the Mentimeter. One, and I'll read these out, is the metrics expected from funding institutions are too linear and discipline specific. It does not consider interdisciplinary research. I would like to ask Shirley, what you'd like. Do you have anything to say on this, on the lack of space for interdisciplinary research?
No, I think this is correct. And this, even though I must say, even the fact that I'm here today also signifies like things are a bit changing. But I must say that we also miss seeing an opportunity here, because it is not only NWO that is currently opening up, it's also the Rijksfondsen from the arts, within the arts, that has been making this jump. So also, like 2 days ago, I gave a presentation in Nijmegen, and there it was really about how arts can be incorporated into science, really, and to understand certain disciplinary borders that we maintain ourselves is really critical in this. So as academics need to pursue certain requirements, it is clear that in the proposal you must adhere to that. But if you look and are interested in making a jump, you can also see how can you work in the professional realm on the discipline that you want to engage in, and find opportunities to collaborate in that way, instead of having to kind of demand that within your own force. And I'm not saying that that is the solely solution, but it is a beginning that you can think from.
Thank you, Shirley. And I wanted to ask Dr. Saran Stewart. Saran, do you also see this linear thinking, or this problem of linear thinking in other areas in the Caribbean?
Absolutely. I think that, so I do believe that within the various universities across the region, there are over 200 of them, right? I do believe that there are silos, and these are silos from the colonial past. There has been bridging of these silos to have, for example, I'm a social scientist, I'm the only one on the CARFA, the public health with epidemiologists, medical researchers, etc., because there was a need for us to understand how is public health from a social scientist or an education perspective happening. I think what ends up happening, however, is that the linearity, which I saw on the Mentimeter, which I liked, was how the methodology of assessing who should get what is also done, right? And so there is a huge Caribbean research methodology movement happening that has quite a strong following within the diaspora and within the region in terms of training researchers to understand who are our formidable thinkers and writers and authors and methodologists, and what methodology is appropriate for our region, keeping in mind climate, environment, culture, arts, humanities, etc. And I think sometimes the intra and the interdisciplinary approach is necessary and is ever more necessary post-COVID. So it's an interesting dynamic that is happening. I do wonder, however, there seems to be even silos with how we treat within the Caribbean based on country. And I think that's also very interesting, because there is a lot happening. And I do wonder how much the six countries participating within that space, are a part of that space, are knowing who the researchers are, who the neighbors are in that space across languages, across cultures, and whether or not there's more bridging happening, because it's already happening. This is not something new. It's been happening now. So I'm curious, to be quite honest with you, because there are so many universities within our region, so many scholars. So I do wonder if there is any prevention of that already that's going on.
Thank you. I'll read another one coming from the Mentimeter, another statement. Funding is linked to a particular way of knowing. This is problematic, as it excludes ways of knowing that are not linked to scientific frameworks. I'll ask Danique to comment on this.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to comment on this. This resonates very strongly. And it makes me think of what we've been talking about, of research not only being done within institutions, but being a much broader concept, especially in the Caribbean, but then bringing in the idea the legacy in the way things have always been done, that the funding comes from a specific way of knowing that is very intimately related to the colonial past and the colonial legacies of these regions. It means that there's also a legacy of, I'm not sure if mistrust is too hard a word, but to engage communities that are outside of these kind of formal traditional academic institutions within the wider umbrella idea of research requires us to be able to somehow overcome that legacy of mistrust that exists because because of the ways different ways of knowing have engaged with each other within the Caribbean, within the so-called Kingdom of the Netherlands. And so it definitely resonates that this dominant way of knowing that informs these funding calls is problematic. And I'm happy to hear, I think, what comes true in all of Arnold's responses, but also in the discussions we're having earlier today and right now, is that this is changing. But I'm very curious to see how these different ways of knowing can coexist within formal academic institutions, outside of formal academic institutions, so that the research that we do, and research as a broad umbrella term, can be meaningful within the Caribbean.
Thank you. Shakara, do you have anything to say from the space of pharmacology with regards to other ways of knowing or interdisciplinary research?
I'm not a pharmacist, but that's okay. From a medical perspective, in my experience, what I know from how it usually goes is that there's a problem or an issue, and then you gather some people and you make the request, and the request is granted, and you get to do research about that particular issue, and then you send that report back. And I've always thought that the downside to that is that others with more interesting issues that are not necessarily acute problems don't necessarily get the funding. So what you often get are short-term bursts of activity, and then it's done and it stops, and then another short-term burst, instead of things that allow for more broad, long-term, also more creativity and space. So I do definitely feel that idea that certain ways of knowing, I think that's a nice way of putting it, definitely get the priority above others, because oftentimes practically what I see a lot, definitely in the aspect of public health, is a lot of descriptive statistics and descriptive data. And of course, that's extremely interesting because our population is not properly researched in general. So obviously bringing that information to the forefront is relevant. So I'm not trying to discount that at all. But what I think is unfortunate about that is that there is not a lot of space to move away from that, because we often think, definitely in medicine, if it's not large prospective study or not an opportunity to organize a trial, then it's not worthwhile. Meanwhile, there's a lot of space and room for qualitative research that can be set out on a larger scale, and where you can include multiple islands and still get a lot of very, very useful information that you can use in everyday practice. So that's my real life example and experience in that regard.
Thank you very much. And quickly, before we move on to the next topic, Arnold, the last three comments were about resources, money, funding, the size of institutions.
Yeah.
What do you have to say about that?
Oh, okay. Touching on something that was already mentioned as well, the limited amounts of money that is available that's within a specific program. But there are links between all the Caribbean islands, obviously, and beyond, which should also be reflected in the way in which funding should be designed. So that means there is a task for us at NWO to connect with funders, let's say across the globe, in order to see if we can collectively design with, again, Caribbean communities on how we can increase funding based on the needs and demands by the Caribbean communities. So yeah, let me talk to my colleagues abroad in order to try to increase that funding.
And would that include the European Union as well?
Yeah, sure. Let's leave no option out. I mean, let's look where there's an opportunity. And I guess that also adds a bit on to the question, the last comment that was made. Many universities situated in the Netherlands are much bigger institutions. Yes, but programs can be designed with specific requirements in order to ensure or guarantee even that the funding goes directly into the Caribbean region. You don't necessarily have to have one pool of applicants in which applicants from the Caribbean region battle it out with applicants from the Netherlands. If that's something that effectively is a bottleneck, then we should get rid of that.
Right, right. Okay, great. All right, we're going to move on to topic 2 of this discussion, which deals with the position of the diaspora and their relationship to researchers in the Caribbean. So the question, and I'll pose it to you first, Arnold, and then we'll move on to our others, is what comes to mind when thinking of ways in which the research community on the islands and the diaspora can work together. Here you've worked with many people from the diaspora, the Caribbean diaspora, and you've seen the potential.
Yeah, but I don't have a good answer. I don't feel I'm in a position to answer this question, especially not as a first person. But I'm not a member of the Caribbean community from the islands nor from the diaspora. Okay. So I think we should have somebody else talk
We
first.
could definitely move on and ask Shirley Emanuelson, who is currently in Amsterdam and conducts research in the Caribbean.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's again, this is also a bit controversial. I have some thoughts, and I hope that the panel members and can kind of share how they view it. One is Arnold, you mentioned about the facilitator role, right? That that you're going into, or as an organization, institution. But the fact of the matter is that there has been a lot of gaps. So when you do that facilitator role, there isn't an infrastructure that you can kind of tap into that is already solid because of those gaps, right? So then being the facilitator is one side of it, but what I have experienced and I'm experiencing so far is that oftentimes when you have to create your team, you're always on the primary level of needs to kind of make projects succeed, you're already surviving. There is a lot of shifting of responsibilities, understanding of what the roles are, what does it imply on practical terms that we're missing. And here I'm speaking of only one side. So only, let's say, on each island, which is also different. And then when you start working also with the Netherlands, that has a whole other implication on it. So even if we speak of the application process and understanding, so you're talking about design, research design, if you are not really going to meetings and any of the yearly informative sessions, so as a diaspora, you are much more aware because there is more access to information. And on the other side, on the islands, you're so taking care of the primary needs at times. So there is a constant gap again being created that is reinvent or like a kind of continuous. And then there's also an expectation level and different times. So yes, it is very good for us to work, but not everyone is busy for research for the same reason or the same end goal. At the end, we are individuals. And when you live as an islander in the Netherlands or in Europe or in the US, and you live on the islands, it's just you're dealing with different times and you're reacting to different times that are occurring. And we need time And we need to you need to kind of foster that understanding for us to be able to see each other first. And I'm sad to say that, but in academia, oftentimes there's no time. So that's one of the problems.
Great, thank you, Shirley. And before I ask Shakara to comment on the ways she thinks that diaspora can work together with researchers in the Netherlands or in the metropolis, I want to remind everyone that they can join the discussion and give their feedback or questions, pose questions through the Mentimeter app, of course. Shakara.
Yes, I'd like to second that. Please engage, because what I'm about to say, I think, is somewhat controversial, but it's something I still want to bring to the forefront. I think oftentimes when I'm invited to these types of things, and over the years, even when I was still living in Holland, then there's often a focus on connecting, like getting to know each other, talking. And then I get added to these groups, and then I join these organizations, and we talk and talk and talk, which is great because, that's the first step. But I've been feeling personally over the last year, particularly, because if you look at my phone now, there's multiple Caribbean research groups, Dutch Caribbean research groups that I'm a member of. I think we need to move towards actually working together, actually doing stuff together. And I think that's where it really starts, because I think that's when you naturally start to get that it starts to build when you're actually going through the steps and the phases with one another. And I know it's not easy, but I think instead of always starting a new platform or a new way for us to connect, that out of these things, also the Dutch Caribbean Research Week, it would be lovely if researchers, also interdisciplinary, would actually connect to one another, actually conduct projects together. And I know that's a big ask, but that's what I think the next step is, to really bring that change about.
Great, thank you. Danique?
Yeah, thanks. I can only echo that. I think a lot of us are on the same line in these panel discussions. We're bringing kind of the similar energy, and I recognize that a lot of effort has been put in to kind of build this trust and foster these bonds. And I think we're at this critical point where if we don't actually take action together, then we'll stay in this limbo of, do we trust each other or not? Will we work with each other or not? Can we do meaningful work together or not? And I'm not advocating for a false sense of urgency here, in the sense that I think if you talk about like the implications of funding and different ways of knowing, there's also different senses of time. And I think it's also important in cultivating this unison and collaboration to kind of honor Caribbean senses of time in a way that also allows us to build trust and lets us collaborate together. So in all of the discussions that we had as a program committee for this Dutch Caribbean Research Week, my hope has always been that following these panel discussions, there will be concrete action, that there will be momentum for us to actually collaborate together. So I can only echo what's been said so far, and invite also people in the audience, but all of us in this panel as well, to think of concrete ways to give follow-up to these discussions.
Thank you. Saran, you know research in the diaspora, you know research back home in the Caribbean?
Yes, I do. I have researched in over 26 of our countries throughout the region. So that was actually a follow-up question for each of you. Which boards are you on? Do they cut across languages? Do they cut across different past colonialist empires? Do they cut across different various systems and disciplines? I do argue a lot that to be a Caribbeanist is absolutely fundamental to understand the history of Belize and the Garrafonos to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the history of Puerto Rico versus Cuba versus University of Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic versus Martinique versus Suriname versus Guyana, French Guyana, current British Guyana. And then, of course, Saba, Eustatius, Bonaire, ABC Island. And I named that because I think when you said the diaspora, you know, I was wondering, which diaspora? The Caribbean diaspora? You know? Right. Which one are you talking exactly? Because I heard you also said the metropolis, and I was like, you know, so a lot of it, having done this work for quite a while and sit currently on multiple boards, as well as developing the next set of researchers, where I'm on committees or as a part of the jury in the Netherlands, as well as throughout the Caribbean and in the United States for Caribbeanists in the diaspora, understanding their current context is very important, and their relationship with the region is critical. Doing research within the region is fundamental for us not to play a colonizer's role or to continue to weaponize research. A lot of us and my current colleagues that we do work with, we do work alongside what is already happening because we're learning from what they're already doing, including epistemologies, ontologies, and understanding what should education context look like in the Belizean region, right? What should educational context look like at Anton de Kom University of Suriname, right? Versus University of the West Indies, or the University of Havana. I ask this because it is really important for us to understand our locale, how we relate to it when we're within the region, outside the region, and how we continuously work to elevate and uplift knowledge and value it for and by the region. I think one of the most important things I've learned within the medical space and being from outside of that is how much was taken for granted within the historical space and how it alluded to our non-communicable diseases, for example. And how many within the diaspora, within the United Kingdom, has asked the same question. Why are so many Afro-Caribbeans within the UK has the #1 leading cause of death being non-communicable diseases, diabetes, and hypertension? They had to come to the region to understand that. They had to understand what medicines were we using, what doses, how we were medicating, because what they realized, it was not working where they were. So it was an interesting, because then we got to, well, how do we prepare saltfish? In different countries, it's called something different, or bakes, or fried dough, right? Those types of foods that were inherited from enslavement and passed down culturally, still eaten today in many of our countries, but they have arguably led to generations of hypertension. Understanding that allowed us to then understand from nutritionists and dietitians what we needed to do in schools to break the chains of how we were doing just food education, right? So something as simple as that allows us to learn across the diaspora, but from the region, the core of what we were already trying to learn and understand what was happening and how best to treat, not to ask someone else to treat us, but for us to treat ourselves. And that has taken generations to really learn and unlearn. And so, you know, constantly would always push within this space, as my fellow panelists have so rightfully said, how do we work more together, but across our disciplines, across our countries, and learn what's already taking place and how we can either continuously learn and uplift that. I think that's important to continue this work with such a small region, to be honest.
All right, thank you. And the first questions in the Mentimeter have appeared. One in particular related to what you were just saying, Saron, is someone suggested that researchers within a particular island must find ways to collaborate with each other before moving outward. Shirley, you're doing research or conducting research on actually different islands. What do you think about that?
Let me just, researchers within a particular island must first find ways to collaborate with each other before moving outward. Well, I think, and here is a matter of discipline difference, if I may, already. When the time for me to come out would be when work is already done. And that would have meant that I would have already collaborated or have had a network. And that's the moment where I step. While in terms of research, I mean, we're engaging, you have to talk about what you're going to do. So you present it officially from the start without really understanding where you're going. You're already saying something that is on black and white, written, and almost seems fixed. So in that sense, that is a shift, because when you present something, it almost seems untouchable, or it can be perceived as such, right? So I think, yes, it should start, but I think there are ways, there are systems set in place and traditions set in place that we must understand why it's that, and then to say, okay, I will do these types of things, and really understand from an individual level how I can make these compromises, because I cannot keep doing the way I was doing only in the arts field. I need to negotiate that. And that's something, I think, of big power that we have in the Caribbean region, to negotiate certain areas very well. So I think as an individual, I'm very well aware that, yes, you need to collaborate from the start, but the way you present something at the beginning of your research, for instance, is very crucial. That will allow for more of that to happen.
Right, thank you. Another comment that we have here on the Mentimeter is research that is led by the research community on the islands should be centered. Arnold, would you feel comfortable commenting on the need for centering the research community on the islands?
I do, Antonio, thank you. And I think that also touches well on what was said in the previous topic, and also with parts of the comments that were made by the other panelists just now. I agree entirely with this comment, and I think that's also something that the Caribbean program moving forward is trying to do. Center the community. We're also going to come out, communicate that, and commit to that. A practical way in which we are going to about this is we are exploring the adoption of a new type of research funding method. This is a bit of behind the scenes type of talk, because there is also, like, there are boards and constellations of researchers, but you may not know there are also constellations of research funding policy officers working across borders and also in a transatlantic matter, for instance. So one of the methods that I've been following in the past couple of years, which is mostly adopted by philanthropic organizations working with precarious or marginalized communities, and also working with the Global South a lot, is called the participatory grant making method, which is a concrete method in which you shift the power in decision making. So that means metrics, it means what is valued as knowledge or knowledge production, how can things be assessed, basically anything within a funding instrument can be decided on by the community for which it's intended. So that's, I hope, a concrete response to that first comment.
All right, thank you for that. Shakara from the world of medicine.
Yes, if I think research should be led by Caribbean researchers on the islands, I'd like to offer to that, although that's in first instance true, I'd like to add the fact that I think that everybody brings something important and different to the table. Because I work here every day in the prevention center on the island. And all of my team is in the Netherlands with the University of Amsterdam and the Dutch Public Health Institute. And I think the different perspectives are very important. Like, I'll give you guys another example that I've recently had. Like, some of my research is about decision-making and informed decision-making. And I recently got feedback from a reviewer saying that maybe I shouldn't highlight the colonial past as a possible reason why people prefer to have autonomy. Now, this is when you have to put on your gatekeeper hat and be like, of course, the issue is multifaceted and there's a lot of reasons, but if we want to be responsible and we want to respect the context in which we're operating, then it would be an injustice not to talk about it. So I think in my own experience, it keeps you sharp to remain critical and objective. But at the same time, because you are here on a daily basis, because you're seeing the reality and the truth, and indeed what the other panelists have highlighted, our history is so important and speaks to who we are and how we act and the things that we experience on a daily basis, that no matter if it makes others uncomfortable or not, it's the truth and it matters and we have to talk about it. So I'm very happy to see that everybody here is very in touch with that, aware of that, and I'm sure the work reflects that. So that makes me very, very positive. But people like Mrs. Emanuelson, sorry, I can't see your first name.
Emanuelson.
Yeah, Shirley. You're in the Netherlands, but also doing work from that European perspective towards us. And because you yourself are a child of the soil, then your position is also unique. And those different ways of being inside of the research that is happening, because we forget that research is living, it's moving, it's people's real lives. So all of us as different players in the game, I don't want to call it a game because it's serious stuff, matter and are important. And the best thing you can keep doing as a researcher is to remain reflexive, remain thinking about your position and how you are influencing the work that you're participating in. And that's why we're all important in our different positions.
Thank you, Shakara. And lastly, we have one comment here from the Menti.com, and that is an awareness that even though we are Caribbean does not mean that we can speak on behalf of the Caribbean, no matter where one is based, reflect our own positionality. And I think that that was what Shakara was saying. Danique, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, that resonates really strongly. I identify as a Curacao and a Caribbean researcher. I'm based in Utrecht in the Netherlands. That informs how I can or want to engage with anyone around me. It informs how I engage with my supervisors, who are Dutch people based here in the Netherlands. It informs how I engage with the participants in my research, or however you want to call the many stakeholders involved in research. And I mean, not to throw more buzzwords into the discussion, but I've kept thinking of the decolonial concept of like a place where many worlds can coexist, where I can center myself as the center of mass of my own research and be respectful that I'm moving through other worlds as I go throughout the world, and that informs my position wherever I am, and so that my contribution or the value of my contribution is fundamentally different when I am in a Dutch room in Utrecht and speaking to Dutch colleagues, as opposed to when I'm in Curacao. I move differently. I am almost a different body in those spaces. And so I think it is very important to not use universalizing language in how we speak about the Caribbean and how we speak about ourselves. But also, that's why I really liked your intervention just now, Shakara, and not to use universalizing language also in what we prescribe to be, in what we aspire to to be Caribbean research. So if anything, I think a starting point is to always reflect on our positionality and to let that shine through, to bring ourselves into our research in that way, in how we communicate with others, but also in how our methodologies are designed, in decisions that we make throughout our research process.
Thank you very much, Danique, and thank you all, those who participated in this panel, and thank you to those who post your comments and questions through the Mentimeter. I'll now pass the floor back to Audilla.
And the winner is Jan Bond. Congratulations. And I hear that you're in the session. Yes, you're in the Zoom. Can you unmute yourself, Jan?
Yes. I'm unmuted. Yes, I'm very glad. Thanks for sharing.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I'm quite surprised, actually. I wasn't expecting this at all. But
why not? That was my question. Were you expecting this big win?
Well, no, not in the first place, because I saw very, very amazing other posters, and I started my PhD in January, so it's quite early stages, and yeah, so I wasn't expecting this, but I'm quite glad that I got to receive the prize.
I think you're super entitled to it, because all the votes, or the most of the votes, went to you, and in Dutch we say steek hem in je zak en geniet ervan. So this victory is yours. Enjoy it. After the sessions, you go together so people can congratulate you. Of course, maybe you want to type something in the comments so people can congratulate you or talk to you about your post or ask questions. Make sure you do everything that is needed to celebrate this victory.
Yes, well, yes, thank you. I will. I want to thank the team over at NWO as well, of course, for organizing this amazing yearly event, which brings such a diverse group of researchers together. And I think it's an amazing feat that it happens year in, year out.
Well, thank you. I will make sure that NWO and the Dutch Caribbean Research Week hears this, and I think they are really happy to do this because of people like you. To end this week with a bang with our keynote speaker of today, because, yeah, as I've already said, the DCRW has almost come to an end, but not without hearing from our keynote speaker. He was also the moderator of today, Professor Dr. Antonio Carmona Baez, and he will, as I said, he's also the president of the USM and also the professor in political science. He earned his PhD in international relations in 2001 from the University of Amsterdam, where he taught international relations and the political economy of development. Welcome, Dr. Antonio. Can you please join me?
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, you've been our moderator throughout the day. How did you find the discussion and the topics that you discussed earlier today?
Well, the topics were fantastic because they speak to what we've been discussing for the past couple of years in the Caribbean and amongst Caribbean universities. What was interesting is that earlier in the week I was following all the panels and all the activities from St. Martin, and now I'm here with you in The Hague. And yeah, it's a very different dynamic, but I'm glad to see that everyone is participating.
Is enjoying. And how was it at USM in St. Martin to watch the streams from here? Was it like a cozy gathering, or were there fiery discussions? Take us.
Many discussions, but we were very proud, first of all, of our colleagues, the staff that made it possible to have the streaming, online at USM. and of course the familiar faces, people coming from the Caribbean, now studying or being based in the Netherlands.
Yes.
That connection was felt very strongly.
Nice, nice. And we are so happy that you could facilitate that in St. Martin so that people could watch it together. And now you're here for your keynote.
Yes.
I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. Are you ready?
I think I'm ready, yes.
Okay, good. Well, a big round of applause for Dr. Antonio Carmona Baez.
Good afternoon and good morning in the Caribbean. Marking the 150th anniversary of the definite abolition of slavery and underscoring the need for reparations, 2023 has seen a robust transatlantic dialogue on the historical impact of enslavement and the vestiges of colonialism which continue to characterize unequal relations and development within the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Accompanying the dialogue on slavery and reparations, considering as well climate change and the danger of pandemics such as COVID-19, is a sense of urgency on behalf of the Caribbean part of the kingdom to shape research agendas that can contribute to the realization of the right to development enshrined in the General Assembly 4128 resolution of 1986 and supported by regional and international conventions on the environment and declarations on the indigenous and Afro-descendant communities. I invite the general public and our scientific community to consider how research agendas are currently being shaped among the 6 islands of the Caribbean, how we are setting the priorities, and how scientific interventions can contribute to unraveling the stubborn inequalities embedded in our colonial existence and promote the fundamental right to self-determination, but not only in 2023 and 2024. The right to development, self-determination, and the inclusive design of research are interconnected principles that have the power to shape the future of our global society, and more particularly, the future of those who live in the Caribbean, where we are faced with global challenges exacerbated by persistent colonial structures. If tomorrow morning, the 1st of July, we are going to stand still with the monarchy in remembering the painful experience of chattel slavery in the territories comprising the historical Dutch Empire, we are compelled to recognize that the institution of slavery happened under colonial domination and recognize that we continue to suffer colonial difference in the inequalities that exist between Dutch citizens residing in Europe and Dutch citizens in the Caribbean. Its legacy persists to this day as the structural inequalities and systemic racism resulting from this brutal history obstinately disadvantaged communities that are historically enslaved or were historically enslaved. I have to think back to another 1st of July, what we in St. Martin call Emancipation Day, July 1st, 2020, when the government of the Netherlands mandated the governments of Curacao, Aruba, and St. Martin to reduce public spending, suggesting a cut in salaries of public servants and school teachers by 12.5%. Having the cuts impacted education has not been sufficiently studied, but it suffices to say that education on the islands is not where it needs to be, and the austerity measures certainly did nothing to help guarantee access to quality education during a pandemic. We can only hope that this crime that was committed during catastrophe is never repeated. In his outline of 10 theses on coloniality and decoloniality, Puerto Rican scholar Nelson Maldonado Torres states, after the civil rights and decolonization struggles of the 20th century, liberal societies have continued building on the various lines of dehumanization that were characteristic of colonial and segregationist older versions by limiting equality to a formality that is used effectively against groups that demand change, and by considering demands for empowerment and co-participation or calls for tolerance and inclusion. Generally speaking, says Maldonado, liberal societies, including universities and their liberal arts and sciences, strive to create a world to the measure of ambiguous and incomplete legal changes that perpetually postpone, if not seek to completely eliminate, any serious accountability, justice, or reparations. In the short time that we have, we can carry out an exploration of these interconnected themes. Parallel to this, I would like to argue that all discussion concerning reparations for slavery and continued colonialism will naturally have to take into account the research priorities established by the scientific community in the Caribbean and the interest they represent. I would like to suggest that there is an ethical responsibility on behalf of the Kingdom authorities to direct funds and resources to the research endeavors which are selected and prioritized by the scientific and academic communities in the Caribbean territories, by first and foremost Caribbean researchers, in service to the full realization of human rights and self-determination on the islands. The right to development encompasses the fundamental principle that all peoples, regardless of their race, gender, or socio-economic status, have the right to participate in, contribute to, and benefit from the processes of economic, social, and cultural development. The right recognizes the intrinsic value of every human being and acknowledges their entitlement to a life of dignity, free from poverty, oppression, and discrimination. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations in 1948, clearly serves as the basis to the right to development. The right to development necessitates the practical implementation of policies and strategies that promote social progress, economic growth, and cultural advancement. It requires investment in education, healthcare, infrastructure, and the eradication of systemic barriers that hinder individuals and communities from realizing their full potential. Governments, international organizations, civil society organizations must work in harmony to create an enabling environment that empowers individuals and ensures equitable access to resources and opportunities. Central to the right of development is the principle of self-determination, which is enunciated in both the UN Charter and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights of 1966, ratified by the State Party of the Netherlands in 1978. This principle recognizes the inherent right of peoples to determine their political status, pursue their economic, social, and cultural development, and freely dispose of their natural wealth and resources. Self-determination affirms the agency of communities, enabling them to chart their own path and shape their collective destiny. It is the antidote to colonialism and all forms of external domination, asserting the sovereignty of nations and peoples. Article 2 of this covenant, to which the Netherlands committed to implementing in all its territory, compels the state, not the autonomous or dependent territories, but the state, Nederland, to use the maximum of its available resources to ensure self-determination where everyone within their territories, citizens or not, enjoy their economic, social, and cultural rights. Article 2 also obliges the states to guarantee that the rights are realized without discrimination of any kind as to race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. Self-determination manifests itself in various forms, such as decolonization movements, struggles for autonomy and independence, and the recognition of indigenous rights. It demands the dismantling of structures that perpetuate marginalization and exclusion, giving voice to those historically silenced and empowering them to participate fully in decision-making processes. It encompasses economic self-sufficiency, cultural preservation, and the protection of human rights generally. However, it is in Article 73 of Chapter 11 of the UN Charter which outlines the rights of people in non-self-governing territories and the obligations the member states have to guarantee the well-being of the inhabitants. With subsection A, ensuring political, economic, social, and education advancement, subsection B, assuring political freedoms, subsection C, the obligation to support peace and security, and subsection D, the most interesting for the topic of today, and I quote, to promote constructive measures of development, to encourage research, and to cooperate with one another, and when we're appropriate, with the specialized international bodies with a view to the practical achievement of the social, economic, and scientific purposes set forth in this article. Therefore, any discussion on the right to development, self-determination, and the importance of inclusive research must necessarily address the issues of reparations for slavery and continued coloniality. Reparations in this context involve rectifying historical injustices, acknowledging the immense harm inflicted upon individuals and communities, and providing them with restitution, compensation, and rehabilitation to confront the catastrophes of climate change and pandemics. Reparations should aim to rectify the ongoing socio-economic disparities resulting from slavery and contribute to the healing and reconciliation of affected communities. No, research in the Caribbean is not to be funded on the whims and goodwill of individuals who work at NVO, Zone MV, or the Dutch Ministry of Education, Culture and Science. Rather, the Netherlands, read the Ministries and Kingdom Relations, is obliged to guarantee the promotion of research while prioritizing advancement and well-being of the inhabitants of its dependent territories, in line with the way the people of St. Martin, Curacao, Aruba, Saba, and Statia define well-being, progress, and full realization of the right to development without imposing harmful conditions. Yes, research plays a pivotal role in understanding the complexities of colonialism, slavery's legacy, and informing the design and implementation of reparative measures. Rigorous and interdisciplinary research can shed light on historical atrocities, trace the intergenerational effects of slavery, and illuminate the persistent racial and gender disparities that permeate our societies. It can provide evidence-based recommendations for policy interventions, contribute to the healing of collective trauma, and foster a more inclusive and empathetic understanding of our shared history. Early this year, as president of the University of St. Martin, I was honored to be invited by the Prime Minister of our country, St. Martin, the Honorable Silveria Jacobs, to join other members of the community in establishing, according to ministerial decree, the Advisory Committee on Slavery, Atonement, and Reparations. We received the mandate to design a plan of approach and carry out research on themes related to slavery and its impact upon our people. Early on, we quickly came to three fundamental values. 1, inclusivity and community engagement. 2, working together with our brothers and sisters on the northern French territory of Saint Martin, because we believe that we are one island, one people. And 3, the understanding that slavery was an economic system operating within colonial domination, so that the two cannot be separated. That is, there is no atonement or acceptable apology for slavery, while the colonial structure, keeping us vulnerable, continues to perpetuate itself. On the committee, we have young and senior St. Martiners, those specialized in education and culture, others in areas of physical and mental health, practitioners of spirituality and faith-based communities, political economists, and legal experts. We take a holistic approach that speaks to our local reality defined by local workers who serve our community. Another initiative that is noteworthy is Carib Research, an independent non-governmental research foundation established in Aruba in 2018. Carib Research is the first and so far only research foundation that has representation on all 6 Caribbean territories of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. The board members of Carib Research are region-based academic professionals with research experience, local governance experience, and in-depth knowledge and understanding of the local culture, history, and realities of the 6 islands. In 2021, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, Carib Research completed its 2022-2026 research agenda, all focused on the central theme, reimagining our realities, strengthening our capacity to deal with crises. Priorities were divided into 5 research areas. 1, history, construction of society, welfare, and well-being. 2, governance, institutions, and integrity. 3, economy, finance, and entrepreneurship. 4, education, training, and language. And 5, environment, technology, and progress. The research agenda of Carib Research offers insight into the central theme and the aspects that play a central role in it, more particularly crisis, crisis management, sovereignty, and resilience. In a sense, the St. Martin Advisory Committee on Slavery and Atonement and Carib Research serve as models by which government and funding agencies in the Netherlands can guarantee the implementation of Article 73 of the UN Charter in support of the right to development. Similarly, and what should be certainly celebrated, is the success of the NVO-sponsored research program, Islanders at the Helm, co-creating research on sustainable and inclusive solutions for social adaptation to climate challenges in the Caribbean, running now for 2.5 years. This multidisciplinary program, spearheaded by Professor Corinne Hoffman and Dr. Francio Guadalupe, was actually designed by a tour of all 6 islands, whereby the communities were invited to comment upon the work packages, indicating priorities and suggestions to the research being carried out in the fields of the culture and the arts, archaeology and paleobotany, policy studies, and architecture and water management, with an extra work package dedicated to the formation of an expertise center, providing courses to professionals and practitioners. The co-chairs eventually changed the name of the program proposal from Islanders in Peril to Islanders at the Helm. A researcher in architecture, for instance, did not come to St. Martin to offer recipes to impoverished population of St. Martin. Rather, she came to dialogue with members of the community, respecting and upholding useful, local and traditional knowledge practices such as jollification, the collective effort of building homes, to inform sustainable design which meets the needs of St. Martiners. Although we are waiting to see if Zone MV will finally and fully commit to supporting research in the Caribbean through Caribbean universities, we are happy to see 2 collaborative projects that emanated out of the pandemic and hosted by the University of Curacao, University of Aruba, University of St. Martin, and the Curacao Biomedical and Health Research Institute, together with Utrecht University. One dealing with the impact of COVID-19 measures on vulnerable families in Curacao, Aruba, and St. Martin, and a second on food security and economic diversification in the same countries. Each successfully moving ahead, a splendid way indeed of ushering in a new era in research, establishing priorities from the loci of enunciation. What these 3 research endeavors have in common is the pursuit to engage the communities where research is carried out, upholding a human rights-based approach, supporting the right to development, acknowledging the priorities as exposed by local women and men. Today, there is much talk of decolonizing science and research, but decolonizing science doesn't simply mean the hiring of people of color for PhDs and postdoc positions. Rather, and among other things, decolonizing research is about deconstructing boundaries and recentering the communities which suffer from colonial oppression and their needs, and designing methodologies which keep the communities involved from beginning to end. This, based on the spirit of international law and human rights, is the antidote to helicopter science, which has been traditionally entrusted by the metropolis, whereby those unfamiliar with a territory or land, or they land and pick up the data and leave without consulting or even informing the community of the purpose of their visit. In conclusion, the right to development, self-determination, the pursuit of reparations for slavery colonialism, and inclusive design of research are intertwined principles that require our unwavering attention, commitment, and action. By upholding the right to development, we pave the way for a more equitable and just society, where all individuals can thrive and contribute meaningfully. Self-determination empowers communities to reclaim their agency and shape their own destinies, free from external domination. Finally, reparations for slavery are a moral imperative, acknowledging the historical injustices that continue to perpetuate systemic inequalities and demanding redress. Let us forge a path forward guided by these principles, working collectively to build a future founded on justice, equality, and human dignity. In her treatment on the overrepresentation of man, titled Unsettling the Coloniality of Being, Power, Truth, and Freedom, Jamaican scholar Sylvia Winter quoted the Martinican Frantz Fanon from his foundational decolonial text, Black Skin, White Masks. And I quote, "What is by consent called the human sciences have their own drama. All these discoveries, all these inquiries lead only in one direction, to make man admit that he is absolutely nothing, and that he must put an end to the narcissism on which he relies in order to imagine he is different from other animals. This amounts to nothing more or less than man's surrender," says Fanon. "Having reflected on that, I grasp my narcissism with both hands and I turn my back on the degradation by those who would make humanity a mere mechanism. And truly, what is to be done is to set humanity free." To this end, and on behalf of the University of St. Martin, I would like to salute all Caribbean researchers at home and abroad, and to all those non-Caribbean researchers who genuinely engage with our local communities on the islands in sincere partnerships with the intention to support self-determination for the full realization of our human rights and the right to our own sustainable development. A big thank you also to our colleagues at NVO who are instrumental in ensuring that the institutions of higher education and research in the Caribbean play an active role in the planning, organizing, and virtual transmission of this third Dutch Caribbean Research Week. May we go forward in equity. At home in the Caribbean, I wish everyone a pleasant afternoon. Here in Nederland, a pleasant good evening, and to all those who are watching us live, a pleasant weekend further. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for your keynote. Yes. I even forgot to mention the title because I was so excited. Prioritizing Development and Human Rights. That's the beginning of the title, and after that there's a lot more. But human rights, I think that is the best word to describe what you're talking about and what your lectures are about, because we're all human at the end of the day. You need to give back ownership to those who own whatever the subject is you're talking about, right?
That's correct.
Thank you so very, very much. I'm going to wish you a pleasant evening since we're in Den Haag. So thank you, and I will end the DCRW in a moment. So thank you again.
Thank you.
And as I said, all good things come to an end. So also this conference that we've been watching for the last 5 days and been working on from here in Den Haag. Of course, we have not been working on the conference for only 5 days, but I'll get to that. For the last part of information and I want to give to you is if you are in St. Martin, the USM has been screening all week, as we know, and there will be a happy hour after we close down the DCRW today. So if you are on St. Martin and close to the USM, go there and socialize, interact, and discuss with each other all the subjects that you've heard the last 5 days. Also, if you are on Curacao, Triangle Curacao also has happy hours. So go there and go to the platform of the DCRW to find information on how to register. And I think maybe just be a little bit, and just go there, because I don't think you can register anymore. But if you feel like going, just grab your car, grab your bike, and just drive over and see who's there to interact with each other. We hope you've enjoyed the program, shared the research information, and made new connections. I really hope you did. And if you did not go together, if you're not on a physical place where you can join each other, go together and add each other on LinkedIn. That's what I've been doing to stay in touch with everybody who's on the same golf length. And if you're not, to have fiery discussions with that person. Well, thank you for today, the last days, and the entire week. I'm going to give a thank you to the DCRW, the NWO, Amplify Event Marketing, the technique here on site, as you could see, because we had the talk show set up and within a couple of minutes they made a new setup for us. So thank you to the technique here on site. Also the catering here in Den Haag, it was wonderful. All the sandwiches every day. The staff for all appointments, everybody who's working in this building where I've been coming every day, even the people open up the doors. I think everybody needs a shout out. The people on the islands who watched, who participated, the people here in the Netherlands who watched, who participated, Triangle Curacao for making the lunch possible, USM St. Martin for making the streaming possible, Terra Mar Museum, of course, on Bonaire, who made everything possible with the live streams and the live intermezzis. The Learning Orchestra, Aruba, I can name everybody, but I'm not going to do that. But thank you everybody who worked hard and made this all possible. I do want to give some numbers so you can know the scope of this conference the last week. We had 5 keynote speakers, 25 oral presentations, 3 workshops, 6 poster pitches, 15 poster presenters, of course, 1 poster prize winner, and 10 intermezzi. And if you've counted correctly, indeed, it's 9 up until now. We'll end the entire week with our final intermezzi. So today's topic was Towards a Just and Sustainable Future. My name is Audilla Vaughn. That's also my name on LinkedIn. You can add me, you can contact me, you can ask questions about moderating, hosting, and whatnot, all through my LinkedIn, and I'll make sure to reply as soon as possible. And for now, I hope to see everybody next year, even if it's here at the NWO building or maybe somewhere in the Caribbean. We're going to close the DCRW Week 2023 with a closing intermezzo by Randy Holder. Thank you again and hope to see you next year. Signing off.